Hello, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Onofre. I'm a postdoc fellow here at Kansas State University. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about scouting for corn disease. Starting with our growth stage, right? As you can see here, I split the corn growth stage in three parts. The first part of the growth stage, we're going to be focused on the seedling disease. What are they? What we should be worrying? How can we identify them? And then we're going to switch to the foliar disease, which will happen between, especially for scouting, right? V10 or early at the vegetative stage up to the R1, R2. And then later on, we're going to close up this presentation talking about stalk rot and ear rot disease as well. So stay tuned. There's a lot of information, but I hope you enjoy it. So even before we go to the field, right, there's always that question, what should I know prior, even being out there in the field looking for a disease? So a couple points here, just briefly mention, it is also important for you to have an idea of the field history, crops that were planted there before, or even disease that were there before. And then if getting all those informations will help you when you're out there scouting, right? The planting date can be informative because you can associate that with weather, or if you have an early planting date or a late planting date and you're seeing disease on your neighbors, can help you to estimate disease on your field. Your hybrid susceptibility will be important because depending on the susceptibility, you can have different symptoms, reactions in your plants. And also, if you have a resistant to a certain disease, you might not be looking for that one specifically, right? As I mentioned, the history in that field is important because a lot of the corn disease are residual borne. They survive in the field for many years. So that will also help you to get all this information. If you don't have the history of disease in your area, I recommend you to check your management, your local management recommendations. Here in Kansas, we have the Kansas Corn Management 2021 publication, which refers to the previous seasons and give you an idea of what happened last season and what should I be on the lookout for this season. And of course, the weather condition, right? As you probably already heard about the disease triangle. We need to have the host, the plants, but also the weather needs to be favorable. So we have the host, the pathogen, and the weather conditions. So let's start with our first one here. We're going to start with seedling disease. Seedling blights can be caused by several pathogens, including Pythian, Phytophthora, Fusarium, Rhizoctonium, and a few other ones. Those are the most important, I would say. They will cause irregular emergence and poor stand. I have two pictures here, and I highlighted on the top here. As you can see, we have a poor stand or a thin emergence here in these two regions. But if you're there scouting for seedling blights, right, you can also see here in this bottom picture, one dead plant here, which is causing post-emergency damping off. So if you need to identify a seedling blight disease, you have to send it to the lab, send it to your local diagnostic lab. There's several of them. Each state has one. Just contact your university and they will help you to identify what pathogen is causing that disease. And as I mentioned, the four most important ones, right? There's some characteristics that can help you to identify them in the field. And for example, Pythian here requires a flooded, wet soil moisture conditions with cool temperatures between 50 and 60. Phytophthora flooded, however, warmer conditions than Pythian. And then Fusarium, we see a more relationship with wet to dry and cool to warm. It's kind of like hard to identify this disease in the field. So the best way is definitely send it to the lab. And Rhizoctonia, damp to wet and warm conditions as well. And here there's just a picture showing a poor stand, showing some missing stand here, missing plants in this line here. So that would be like just collect those samples and send it to the lab, and they will help you to identify. There's also some relationship with heavy soils can have a certain disease or be more favorable for those seedling blights. And then if you had problems too, like the planting deep, the planting depth of your seeds might also favor this disease development, right? So I would avoid below 2 inches of depth when you're planting your corn seeds. But now switching for the foliar disease, right? We're going to start with southern rust. This disease, it's usually a problem in the southern states. However, it gets up here in the north, depending of the year, can arrive earlier than other years. And the very characteristics aspects of this disease includes a small, numerous, circulus pustules, as you can see here in these two pictures. They have this very characteristic color, which is cinnamon orange colors. They're very round, numerous, as you can see, and they will be primarily in the upper leaf and occasionally in that lower leaf. It can occur, it's not that common, but you can also find it there. Southern rust prefers warm and wet conditions, temperatures above 80 Fahrenheit, and as I mentioned, it will come from the south. So, but it's not the only one that blows with the wind, right? So we have southern rust and common rust. And a big question is, how can we identify those two diseases? And there are a few characteristics, such as I'm showing you here in these pictures, that southern rust are those more rounded, circular shape of lesions, and they're cinnamon and orange. And when you look close to common rust with your field lens, which is always important to carry in your pocket, right? You're gonna see that those lesions of the common rust, they're more elongated or oblong and reddish brown pustules. They definitely can be confused, but there is some ways that you can identify it in the field. Common rust likes lower temperature, so it could be early disease present in your field when temperatures are still lower in comparison with southern rust, which prefers higher temperatures. So it's more like a later problem, especially here in the Midwest and up in the northern states, right? So keep an eye on both rust. Those are the only two for corn, and you can easily identify it in the field. And if you look in the back of the leaf now, what we see here is that southern rust typically does not have any pustule in the back of the leaf. And if you have common rust, you're gonna have this pustule here as well as in the upper and the lower side of the leaf. So this is another way that it can help you to identify what you had there in your field. And a very nice tool that's out there, anyone can access. It's called Corn IPM Pipe, which basically gives you real-time updates from several specialists, and they will tell you where the disease is reported, right? So here I pulled a map from last season. If you go to the Corn IPM Pipe website to select disease, then we're gonna select here southern rust, southern corn rust, and then this map will be generated. When corn is planted, right, we are all gonna be there scouting, and then the specialists will be reporting and the counties will be updated. So you can follow up where disease is being reported, and that will help you to identify, or at least to get close to your correct ID in the field. So keep an eye on the rust and keep an eye on these real-time updates. So now switching gears to gray leaf spot, which is an important disease for corn. Many growers are spraying for this disease. It is important to narrow down how can we identify it in the field, right? So gray leaf spot has 10 narrow lesions with very straight edges, as you can see here in this picture. The symptoms, however, can vary with the lesion's age. So early symptoms can be more like smaller and a little bit rounded here, as you can see in this leaf. And also, it can vary with your hybrid resistance to this disease. So again, it is important to know what hybrid you have out there, so it will help you to identify the proper disease, right? Young lesions may also be surrounded by this yellow halo that you can see here on this picture. Not very well, but you can see that characteristic in the field. And it can take up to 2 or 3 weeks for lesion expansion, right? So, and just to show you how hybrid resistance can change, right? On the top figure here, I have a very resistant hybrid to this disease. And you see that we still have lots of lesions on this leaf. However, they're smaller. They don't develop as well as in a susceptible hybrid that we have here in the bottom of the picture. This disease survives in corn residue. So what we see is that it will start on that lower surface, the lower leaves that are next to the ground, because the disease will start sporulating, and that high relative humidity and that conditions in the lower or in the lower canopy of the plants will be just perfect for disease development. So you're going to see that gray leaf spot will start from the bottom up to that plant. So it is important, if you're looking for this disease, to check the lower leaves of your field. So one disease that's very similar to gray leaf spot, but we can sort it out in the field, it's bacterial leaf streak. This disease is not caused by a fungi, which gray leaf spot is. It's caused by a bacteria, as you can tell by the name. Has long and thin, narrow streaks, which is similar with gray leaf spot in susceptible hybrids, right? However, one of the main difference here is that these lesions now, they are going to be a little bit more wavy in the edges. And when you place that leaf against the sun or your flashlight, you're going to see that it's more translucent. You're going to see that the light will go through, which does not happen with gray leaf spot. So this is a way that you can identify these two or differentiate these two diseases if you're not sure in the field, right? But remember, if you're still not sure, send it to your diagnostic lab, contact your specialists or crop agents, and they will help you to find what's the proper ID for it. Another disease that's being very common in a few states, it's tire spot. This disease can cause severe yield loss, even lodging later on in the plants. However, it's very characteristic of this disease to have this small and several numerous black structure on the leaves here, as you can see. And those lesions, they can be, those black structures, they can be in green tissue and in necrotic tissue as well. So this disease survives in your corn residue. So if you had a problem last year, you might be looking to alternatives, resistant alternatives to this year, because you might have, you have high chance to have this disease again. So this black structure that you're gonna see in the leaf surface here, it's what they call like a little bump field, and that's stomata, right? There's just the structures of the pathogen that will produce more and more spores and will infect and colonize more and more your plants. So it's being reported in Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, and Wisconsin. The states that has not been reported, it's important to keep an eye for this disease and keep scouting. And in case you think you find it, send it to your diagnostic lab and we'll make sure to inform all the corn community. So this is a very important disease. You can also keep a track of this disease in a real time through the Corn IPM Pipe website, where you go to disease again, but instead of selecting southern rust, we're going to select tire spot. When you do that, we'll generate this map here. And as you can see, all this dark grayish part here where I'm circling are the regions that has been reported in the Midwest, northern states here. It's also being reported here in Florida, in South Florida as well. So now switching gears to Diplodia leaf streak, this disease is caused favorable by warm and humid conditions, right? And they will also produce this black structure. Now it's called pycnidia, just another way that the pathogen has to produce spores and keep um, the species. And it can be visible if you have your lens with you. Just get it out of the pocket and make sure to zoom into the center of those lesions here. Those lesions are going to be elongated. However, they're like much bigger than the gray leaf spot or the bacterial leaf streak. However, this disease is another one that can be easily confused with northern corn leaf blight. However, northern corn, it's caused or favored by cool and wet conditions, different than Diplodia, which prefers warmer conditions. So those are things to keep in mind when you're out there scouting, to keep an eye on the weather, on the temperature, on the rain, to see what's happening, right? And then when you get your lens again and look into the center of this big elongated lesions and wedge leaves as well, wavy leaves, you're going to see these fuzzy structures here, which is very characteristic of this disease. While Diplodia, you're going to see more rounded black structures, and they're usually a little bit spreader than these fuzzy mycelia spores that you're going to be seeing here. So this is two diseases that are very similar. However, you can identify them in the field with your lens as well. And keeping on this similar disease, right, we have now Curvularia leaf spot, which is favorable by hot and humid conditions. That's the perfect storm for this disease development. Usually, Curvularia leaf spot is more like an aesthetic damage to the plants. The lesions in this case are small and rounded, as you can see here. However, they can be numerous in your plants, and it's being reported in multiple states. So it's a very, very common disease, which is related with corn eye spot. But now corn eye spot is more favorable. It's favorable by cool and humid conditions, right? In contrast with Curvularia. Corn eye spot will also be rounded, numerous. It's also called by a fungi. However, when you put this leaf with corn eye spot, looking in the sun or with your flashlight, you're going to see that the light pass through and you're going to see those translucent lesions surrounded by these yellow purplish margins. It's most commonly observed in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So it's more a northern east where the corn production, right? Two aesthetic disease that it's out there can be easily confused. So make sure to properly identify them when you're in the field, right? Now we're going to be talking a little bit about stalk rots, right? So we're going to start here with charcoal rot, which is one of the very common diseases in the Midwest and several states. This disease produces this black structure and can be easily identified in the field. When you split that stalk, you're going to see some shredding of that stalk and that pith. And additionally to that, you're going to see this black structure, which is called maculosclerotia. Those structures can survive in the field for many years. And it is important to keep that crop history, right? So if you had charcoal rot problem this season, you're probably going to have next season, and you need to look for some management strategies to avoid that problem. It's related with dry stress and high temperatures. So last season here in Kansas, we had high temperatures, dry stress later in the season, and we did see a lot of more than usual charcoal rot in the fields. So these will cause some premature death of the plants and can lead to lodging as well. So it is important to properly identify, because if you find it in your field, you might want to harvest early and try to save those, save that yield before it goes to the ground, right? Another stalk rot, which is very common here, and the most common here in the Midwest, is Fusarium stalk rot. And this disease will cause this pinkish discoloration here in the stalks. When you split a stalk now, you're not going to see those black structures. However, you are seeing now this pink mold growing here on this stalk, right? And this reddish pink, it's very characteristic of Fusarium stalk rot. So again, this is a way to identify and differentiate these two diseases, charcoal rot and Fusarium stalk rot. Fusarium prefers temperatures, warms as well. However, it's more associated with wet mid-season followed by early season dry event. So keep an eye on the weather, not just go scouting your fields, but thinking about the whole season, right? Which is important. And again, this disease will cause premature death and lead to lodging. So a proper identification, a proper scouting here can save your yield, and perhaps you will harvest those areas prior this lodging happens, right? So now we're going to talk, and our last part here, about some of the most common ear rots, right? And starting with Diplodia ear rot, this is a very interesting disease, which you're going to see this white mycelia. It will usually start from the base here of the kernel, and then will go up, and then mycelia can turn brownish, grayish in coloration. In this disease, you're going to be differentiate this ear rot from the other ones because you will produce this black structure here, which is called pycnidia. So if you find this disease in the field and you see this whitish mycelia, you might want to check for this pycnidia here to see if you can find it and properly identify this disease. And one of the things that happen with Diplodia is that the real economic impact will comes from discounts due to total damaged kernels and also broken corn and foreign material, where to identify these areas, right, with mold problems. So following up here, another one that's very common, it's Gibberella ear rot. This disease now, all the ear rots that we're going to be talking here, they're all residue-borne pathogen. So if you had a problem last season, it is important to keep it in mind and think that you might have, again, if you're planting a susceptible hybrid in your field again, right? So scouting, it's always very, very important. This disease will produce now this reddish pink mold in the ear. And when you peel that ear, you're going to see here in this kernel that mold being developed, right? So again, it's another one that can be identifying the field. And this disease, one of the major problems with it is that produce a toxin, toxin, that's very, very harmful to humans and livestock as well. Those toxins are called dios. I'm not going to even try to pronounce it. They have a hard name here, but those toxins are very, very hard to, very, very harmful to humans and livestock as well. And you can get penalized by having that in your corn. And the third one and last one that we're going to be talking a little bit about of the ear rots, again, a residue-borne pathogen. It's Aspergillus ear rot. This disease produced this very powdery greenish type spores here that you're seeing this kernel, can increase in the presence of insects. If you have insects or worms in your ear, it can increase the production, increase the dispersion of this disease. And again, will produce this olive green mold in the kernels, right? And Aspergillus is another pathogen that can produce a toxin called aflatoxin, which is very toxic to humans and livestock. So it is important to properly identify it these ear rots and see if you have one of those. And Aspergillus is another one that you can be penalized in the elevator if you have this present. So we have been talking a lot about disease here. However, not everything is caused by a disease or a pathogen. There's several other disorders that can be similar to disease damage, right? And those are called abiotic disorders. That includes some nutrient deficient. As you can see here, we have a zinc with a deficiency leaf here. Could be herbicide damage, very common if your neighbor is spraying something and get that drift to your field and you think it might be a disease. However, it was just that herbicide damage. Dry stress can simulate some of the disease, and also some flooding and water stress can cause some related damage that can be like a disease. So keep it in mind that not everything is a disease, and you need to be thinking in not just weather and the surrounding herbicide application and also nutrients, right? So when in doubt, ship the sample. That's the best message that I can give it to you today. There are several plant diagnostic lab around every state. There's one. Here in Kansas, we have the diagnostic lab. There's an email address here. If you're in Kansas, you can send your sample to us and we'll process it quickly and get back to you. There's a link right there. But if you're in other states, make sure that you're in touch with the extension specialists, the researchers, and the diagnostic lab. That will be crucial for a proper management strategy to take place and help you to save that yield, right? So make sure to follow all the guidelines when submitting your samples. There's sometimes you need to add the roots, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to add soil. So depending on the disease, there are some important guidelines to follow. So make sure to stay tuned on those too. So in summary, just to conclude here, it is important to keep your notebook with you and write down everything that you're seeing in the field, right? How many plants are we seeing? What's the area? Is there a pattern? You seeing more like in round spots in your field, or it's more like dispersed in your field? So make sure to take good notes, to talk with your specialist or the diagnostician that will be helping you out. Be familiar with the symptoms and signs. Some disease, as I mentioned, the rust, the pustules, those red or cinnamon tar spot, there's that bumpy black stromata that we talk about it. So there's some ways that you can facilitate you in the field for you to identify and properly identify those diseases, right? Monitoring environmental conditions, very important to know if you're planting in cool and or warm conditions. So it might favorable some seedling disease than others, and as well other disease later in the season. Crop history, it is important because if you had some soil-borne disease or crop residue disease in the previous seasons, you might expect that to happen again. Keep an eye on those real-time updates that's coming from the corn IPM pipe, which is very helpful when you're scouting and also to see where it is, right? And of course, submit a sample to your local diagnostic clinic, right? When unsure, to help you to properly manage those diseases. With that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for hanging there and for this opportunity as well. If you have any doubt or if you'd like to talk more about corn and scouting for disease, please feel free to send me an email here. My address is right here. So thank you again and have a good evening. Bye.